Hey Grace Kids, good to get with you today and be able to share this lesson. And we're going to be talking about God's promise to Isaac. Now, we're going to be talking about a few of his children that's going to be coming along. And I want to be able to share this with you from Genesis chapter 25 and 26. Now, I'm going to go ahead and start reading from this. But the point of this story is that God's covenant with Abraham continues with Isaac's family. It continues down the line, and again, God is keeping his promises. And why can we trust God? It's because he is faithful and does everything for his glory and our good. So that's an important point for you to be able to understand as we head into this lesson. But it's, again, Genesis 25 and 26, we see here that it says, "And these are the generations of Isaac, Abraham's son. Abraham begat Isaac, and Isaac was 40 years old when he took Rebekah to wife, and the daughter of Bethuel the Syrian of Paddan-aram, the sister to Laban the Syrian." Forgive all of my pronunciations. You'll just have to deal with that. But it says in verse 21, "And Isaac entreated the Lord for his wife because she was barren. And the Lord was entreated of him, and Rebekah his wife conceived. And the children struggled together within her. And she said, If it be so, why am I thus? And she went to inquire of the Lord. And the Lord said unto her, 2 nations are in thy womb, and 2 manner of people shall be separated from thy bowels. And the one people shall be stronger than the other people, and the elder shall serve the younger." So here we have the start off of a story in Genesis 25 and 26 of Isaac's family. He gets married, he's 40 years old, and they aren't having any children, so they do the one thing that you need to do when you're having struggles. You need to pray. You need to let God know some of your struggles. And they go to God and they pray to him and they ask him what's going on, and God ends up giving them twins. Now, can you imagine 2 kids? That'd be crazy all at once. But they get twins. And all of a sudden, Rebekah starts having issues, and she's like, "Man, it's like they're fighting in the midst of my stomach. It's just in the womb. They're fighting." And she goes and she prays. Again, a good idea. Go and pray when you're having struggles. And she says, "God, what's going on?" And he says, "Listen, there's two people within your womb, and there's 2 nations that will come from these 2 people." And the ironic thing about it is that these 2 nations, the one will be stronger than the other, and the elder will actually serve the younger. Now, this is a very crazy situation, because in this time period, it was always the elder that would get everything, and the younger would actually serve the elder in the family. That's kind of the way that things work, but this was going to work very differently. This is how God set it up. So here it comes along. The firstborn comes and is red and hairy and just the unique little young one. But there's the firstborn, and they name this child Esau. The secondborn comes along, in fact, right along with the firstborn, because he's actually grabbing onto the heel of the firstborn. Crazy situation. I'm not sure if I've ever heard of a baby doing this. But here it is, Jacob. They name this secondborn Jacob. He's holding on to the heel of Esau, like, "Hold on, I'm coming. You're gonna wait for me." Very interesting situation. But they grew up, and Esau became the son that goes out into the forest and gets the meat. I mean, he's the hunter. He's the tough one. Jacob, he's a homebody. He stays at home, and he's a great cook. Now, we come into the situation, Esau has been off. He's been hunting. He comes back, and he's starving. And he goes up to Jacob, who's making some stew, or as it says in the KJV, pottage. And he's making some of this stew, and Esau says, "Hey, give me some of that." And he says, "Hold on. If I give you this, you have to sell me your birthright for this." Huh? Yeah, so Jacob wants the blessings of God instead of the Esau being the who would naturally get it as the firstborn. And he says, no. And they fight over it, and finally Esau gives in because he doesn't care. Interesting thought process. But Jacob is sold the birthright for this stew. And Esau is not very happy with Jacob. They always have squabbles and fights, and they're always struggling with each other. But as they get into this, Jacob ends up basically trading away this pottage or this stew for Esau's birthright. Now, all of a sudden in this time period, there's a famine in the land, and Isaac ends up going over to Gerar during this time, and God shows up and starts talking to Isaac and says, listen, I'm going to reaffirm this covenant with you. Since Abraham, your father, followed and obeyed all the commandments that I asked him to do, I'm going to continue this and reaffirm this covenant that I'm going to promise your land's going to be huge, that I want you to stay in the land that I've given you, and I'll provide for you. You will be blessed, and your family's going to be massive, and they're going to be as the stars in the heavens. And again, he is reaffirming all that he promised beforehand. And Isaac is seeing this being played out as he's got 2 children now, who can then get married and have more children and more children and more children. So he's seeing God's confirmation of this. Now, how does Christ connect in this whole entire story? Well, since Jacob now has the birthright, we actually find that God's blessings are going to be passed on to Jacob instead of Esau, which means that Christ is going to come through Jacob's line. So here we have the Christ connection in this whole process, and God's plan working out even through some selfish people, some crazy messed up people here. God can use anybody, but it comes into the point where we see that God's details are all working out, and Jacob now has the birthright, and Christ will be coming through that line. Okay, so very interesting process as we go along in the story. But you say, okay, so what are some of the questions that, just to summarize it up as we close out this lesson for today? One, what was interesting about the birth of Esau and Jacob? Well, first of all, Esau's born, Jacob's holding on to his heel. Isn't that crazy? It's so interesting that happens. What did Jacob demand from Esau for the pottage or the stew? It was his birthright, which is very, very important. And Esau wasn't thinking through it and ended up giving something very, very important away for this stew. What promise did God affirm with Isaac? That he will continue this covenant and that the land would be blessed and the whole earth would actually be blessed through Isaac's family because Abraham kept that covenant, or as far as he followed and obeyed what God had called him to do. All right? And why did God choose Jacob over Esau? That's an interesting thought process, especially since everybody else would have the firstborn getting all the blessings. Why wouldn't God just do what's normal? Well, as you see, God doesn't usually do what's normal. He usually chooses someone who we wouldn't expect. And that's who he chooses, is Jacob. He chooses Jacob, someone we wouldn't expect, to carry on that line to Christ. Which brings us to the point, what about Jesus Christ and his life, and his death, and his resurrection is different than expected for most? See, a lot of people, even the Jews, thought he was going to come and reign and set up a kingdom there and conquer the Romans and set them free and all these other things. They were living so short-sighted. They weren't thinking about the future like God was. They didn't understand the plan. And they thought he was going to be born in a palace and all these other things. And yet Jesus was born in a stable, and he was placed in a feeding trough, and they were the lowliest of lowly families. I mean, there wasn't a lot of money there. There's so many unexpected things. And you wouldn't expect the king, the Messiah, to die on a cross. And yet, a lot of people didn't expect him to rise again either. And yet, he did. So it's very interesting how that plays through. If you believe in Jesus, what is your birthright? Interesting. if we are God's people, his children, what's our birthright? It brings us back to that verse, Galatians 3:29, that we've been talking about. And that's it. And if ye be Christ, then are ye Abraham's seed and heirs according to the promise. What are we heirs of if we're Christians? If we've been saved, we inherit eternity in heaven with God. We inherit the gift that comes with salvation and that relationship with God and all the blessings that come afterwards. I mean, there's so much there that we could talk about. But I hope you're saved. I hope you're a child of God. And if you aren't, I would encourage you to talk to your parents about it, or try to get a hold of our church. And I'd love to talk to you about salvation and make sure you understand fully and that you can know for sure where you're going after you die. I hope you enjoyed the lesson here today. There is an activity, and it's kind of crazy, but it's trying to keep a straight face, okay? When you make these promises, let's say you can make a promise, and then the other ones in the family have to keep a straight face as you make these crazy promises and say whether they believe you or you don't. Maybe some of you say, hey, I will clean my room every day for the rest of my life. Well, guess what? I don't believe you. I don't believe you. But can you keep a straight face in the midst of these? Or I am going to hop on one foot for the next 20 minutes. I don't believe you on that one either. I'm just not sure that you could handle it. But we'll see what happens, see if you can have some fun with that, and hopefully I'll be able to see you again with another lesson. We'll talk to you later.